Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Mailin' It, the official podcast of the United States Postal Service. I'm your co-host, Dale Parsan.
And I'm Yasmin DiGiulio. Dale, do you remember a few episodes ago when we had Chief Postal Inspector Gary Barksdale here on Mailin' It to talk about what the Postal Inspection Service does and his background in law enforcement?
How could I forget? Chief Barksdale filled us in on how they support and protect the Postal Service's more than 600,000 employees, as well as our facilities and infrastructure. We also heard about how postal inspectors get involved in cases where mail is used to traffic drugs or commit fraud. The Inspection Service even has its own accredited crime lab to help with their investigations.
Wow, you were really paying attention.
Of course I was.
Good, because in honor of National Consumer Protection Week this week, we're focusing this episode on how the Postal Inspection Service protects people from mail fraud. Here to talk about consumer fraud protection are two of our esteemed postal inspectors, Ashlea Bowens and Jessica Adams. Ashlea, Jessica, welcome to Mailin' It.
We are happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Ashlea, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your role with the Inspection Service, when you joined, why you joined, and what you've been working on.
All right. So I've been with the Inspection Service for 10 years this month, so happy anniversary to me. Currently, I am on detail as a program manager with the Mail Fraud Program in the U.S. Postal Inspection Service here in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, I was assigned to the USPIS Department of Justice International Mail Fraud Team, also here in Washington, D.C., where we investigate a variety of complex mail fraud cases. I became a postal inspector because of my love of the X-Files, actually. I always wanted to be a federal agent and finally got a shot at it, so I chose the Inspection Service.
Great.
That's a great story. What about you, Jessica? What brought you to the Postal Inspection Service?
What brought me here is before the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, I actually worked back home where I am from. I am an inspector out of the Charlotte, North Carolina field office. I have been with the agency for 8 years this month, so it's my anniversary as well. And before that, I worked for our North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I've just been into public service. I didn't really know the U.S. Postal Inspection Service existed until I worked for the SBI. And again, it was just an amazing opportunity, and I decided to seize it and continue my public service with us. So it's been a great 8 years.
That's great. Well, we're glad to have both of you guys on the team at the Postal Inspection Service.
Thank you for joining us today. Let's jump into things. Let's talk about National Consumer Protection Week. I know it's organized by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, but what's the purpose behind it?
The purpose of National Consumer Protection Week, the event launched back in 1998. It's always held the first full week of March. So this year it's going to be March 6th through 12th. The purpose of this week is really to make the consumers and people aware of their rights, of their consumer rights. We are a big advocate for consumer education, and we want to help the public not become victims themselves. So National Consumer Protection Week is just a great week to focus on that and help the public avoid becoming victims.
That's great. I think the education component is so interesting and so important because that's really the first step of crime prevention is to educate yourself about the crimes around you so you don't become victim of these scams. I know Chief Barksdale talked to us a lot when he was on our podcast about fraud against the elderly, the unemployed, and members of the military. So it really is out there and it's everywhere. Absolutely.
Today with email and social media especially, there are so many ways to fool people into sharing their personal information and to scam them out of money. What is the Postal Inspection Service doing this week to spread the word about different kinds of fraud and how people can protect themselves?
Typically, in past years, the Inspection Service would partner with fellow NCPW agencies, other state and local and federal law enforcement agencies to do consumer outreach. So the outreach has been done primarily in post office lobbies, banks, shopping malls, retirement communities, and churches. During these events, we have been able to hand out pamphlets, brochures, flyers to educate the public on scams. This year, the flyers will be centered on work-at-home scams. This year, the flyers will be centered on work-from-home scams.
I can imagine there's a rise in those type of scams since the pandemic started and so many more people are staying in their homes.
Absolutely. Particularly with some individuals have lost their job during the pandemic and they're looking for ways to make money and they see the advertisements for a work-at-home job. that they think, oh, this is an easy way to make money.
Do you have any examples of common work-at-home scams that you've seen?
Absolutely. One common scam is envelope stuffing. And what that requires is someone offering you a job to do just what it sounds like, stuff envelopes. But you want to be aware of that because they make you buy your own mailing supplies to begin with. And what job do you know of as a consumer that requires you to buy your own supplies to get started?
And I can imagine you don't get reimbursed for those.
You absolutely do not.
Anything else?
Yes, medical billing is another one that we frequently see. Those are typically targeted for people who are just getting started in the field. Many promise billing or coding certification in less than a month. Realistically, these tasks take longer than a month to master. So instead, consumers should look for training or education programs from a local community college or trade school.
Great. I've heard about a scam that offers people at home jobs shipping merchandise from place to place. Jessica, could you tell me a little bit more about that one?
Yes, sir. That one is called our reshipping scam. These involve someone, usually online, will reach out to you and ask you, say, hey, we have this great job. Can you reship some merchandise I bought to somebody else? And you're thinking, okay, well, that sounds too good to be true. And oftentimes these scammers will say, well, every package that you send out will cost X amount of money. So each package will be $16 or $25. It's a scam. Normally the merchandise they're going to send you is bought with illegal funds, someone's stolen credit card. It didn't come from their own pocket. So just that's a common one that we see. And again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
So do the people who fall for these scams, are they liable themselves?
Absolutely. In some cases, they are.
So what are some of the penalties for committing these crimes?
So the penalties can be up to 20 years imprisonment, up to $250,000 in fines, and they can be found liable to pay restitution to other victims that they have victimized.
Wow, that's steep.
It's steep.
That's life-changing.
Absolutely, and definitely an incentive to not commit crime.
Yeah, I think it sends the message that law enforcement isn't messing around when it comes to punishing those who commit these types of crimes. We've talked a lot about education and how important it is. So what are some important tips to help people avoid becoming victims of these scams?
You know, again, just education, be alert, pay attention. Don't agree to receive money or packages from people that you don't know. Don't forward anything to anyone that you don't know. Don't engage in any financial transactions with a stranger. Make sure you really do your due diligence at home. Check out an opportunity. Go on to maybe the BBB, the Better Business Bureau website. Make sure it's a legitimate company. Always just be suspicious and make sure that it's something that's true and legitimate and a real company.
So if you think that you are a victim of one of these scams, perhaps you've been involved with one of these companies that's asking you to do the envelope stuffing or anything like that, what is your next step if you would like to reach out and ask for help?
One of the steps you can do to see if perhaps the company you're working for is a scam, you can research it on the Better Business Bureau. If you think that you have been involved in a scam, you can report it to local law enforcement agencies and federal, definitely the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. To file a report, you can go to our website, which is USPS.gov/report.
So, Ashley, I know you mentioned that there's those stiff penalties for mail fraud. So, Jessica, can you talk about if people should be afraid of coming forward if this is happening to them?
No, people should not be afraid of coming forward. I know a lot of people are probably going to be embarrassed or they're going to think, oh my gosh, I never thought this would happen to me. But in reality, it happens a lot. It's not just them. So coming forward is definitely not something someone should be ashamed of. It's the scammers who take advantage of someone's vulnerability. And, normally people that get scammed are just trying to do what's best for them and their family and make some money. And so there's nothing to be ashamed for that. If they feel that they are being scammed, again, report it to us at www.uspis.gov. We also have prevention tips on the website that they can visit, and they can always call us if they don't have access to a computer. They can call us at 1-877-876-2455 to report that as well.
That's great. I'm glad there's so many avenues that people can either reach out for help directly or look for resources to educate themselves.
Right. And I just want to focus on that they should not be ashamed.
So now that we know what not to do, we're at the part in the episode I was looking forward to the most. The part where we talk about some of the actual work-at-home fraud cases that you guys at the inspection service have uncovered. So Ashlea, do you have any cases that really stand out to you?
Yeah, there was one in particular that I saw regarding an individual who applied for a work-from-home job. The way she got started with the job is she was sent a letter of employment when she responded to an ad. They wanted to confirm her home address, and she communicated with the company primarily and really only through email and text. She was instructed she would receive packages at her address, and when she received those packages, she was supposed to open them, take pictures of the contents, and text the pictures to phone numbers given to her by her quote-unquote employers. Eventually, she received USPS mailing labels from the employers that she was supposed to repackage and then stick this label onto the new package and send on somewhere else. Eventually, she received a letter from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service saying that she was involved in a reshipping scam. When she received a letter from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, she told her employers about the letter, who advised her that the letter itself was a scam and that she can continue doing her job. Her employers also told her that the letter came from their competitors who wanted to see them put out of business, so she was to disregard. Postal inspectors visited her, confirmed for her that it was indeed a scam, and through additional investigations, postal inspectors discovered that she was not quite the victim that originally she appeared to be. She was actually an active participant. So in that particular case, she was arrested and sentenced to 3 years probation.
Wow. So what was so suspicious? What tipped off the inspection service that this was something to look at?
Without getting into too many details, the inspectors noticed that she made a series of false statements that were untrue. She also continued to ignore cease and desist letters that were sent by the U.S. Postal Inspection Service after we had already visited her, which tipped us off, of course, to investigate further and see that she was heavily involved in communicating with her quote-unquote employers in more of a partnership role than a victim role.
Also, I think a lot of times work from home scams, when you have a reshipping scheme, a lot of times the postage that this company will give you to ship is counterfeit. And then sometimes we receive tips from our own U.S. Postal employee letter carriers. You know, if they think something is going on, sometimes they do say something. So there's different ways that we can get tipped on to these scams of work from home.
So Jessica, do you have any cases that stand out to you?
There are other scams work from home. There was a mystery shopping scam. This type of scam is where a postal customer will receive a large check or money order in the mail from their supposed employer, and they will go to the store, you know, with the check that they provided and buy the materials and then send us the money if that is unused. So people will go and cash this check and buy the supplies, and by the time the local financial institutions realize that this check is fraudulent, they're out the money. So again, the victim is going to be out that money, and they've already sent the portion back to this so-called company, and that has benefited from this fraudulent check.
So how does that involve the Postal Inspection Service?
They mail these fraudulent checks. So the company that the victim supposedly works for, they'll mail that check through the mail to their house, and then they'll have instructions saying, take this to the bank, you know, cash it, send us the money that's not used. And then by that time, you know, it catches up, and then they're like, oh no, the check bounces, it's fraudulent, and then that victim is owed that money to the bank.
So basically, if anything touches the mail or goes through the mail, it's under the jurisdiction of the Postal Inspection Service?
Absolutely.
So with these counterfeit checks, who notifies the inspection service that something's been counterfeit? How do you guys find out? Is it the bank's responsibility? Is the person cashing the check's responsibility?
Normally when it comes to the fraudulent checks, these people don't know, you know, at the time that they're depositing it into their financial institution. And the first person notified is the victim itself. And then once they realize they've been scammed, they contact us, or they can contact their local police department. And if it's a common problem, then it makes its way to us.
So you shared some really interesting stories of examples of different types of scams that consumers and the public could find themselves victim of. What is one thing that you would really want consumers to take away from you guys telling these stories and kind of promoting this crime prevention aspect of your work?
I think one thing we want consumers to take away from this week and from the cases that they've heard here today is to know that they're not alone. This happens again a lot of times, and that we are out there to help them and to protect them. And we encourage them to report if they feel like they've been scammed. Prevention and education is a big part of that, because the more people we can educate on these type of scams and give those prevention tips, as, make sure it's a legitimate company, get a job offer in writing, verify a potential employer with the BBB, your state's attorney general office, the Consumers Affairs office. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself so you're not that victim and you're not out anything financial, because that's what these work from home scams are. It's like you want to make money, you want to stay at home with your kids. Again, the pandemic these days, it's really been hard on the working mom especially. And so people are out there looking for these jobs. So scammers take advantage of that.
I think it's the old adage of, if it feels too good to be true, it's probably something to look at a little harder.
Correct, exactly. Get your family, your trusted friends, run it by somebody.
So we've talked a lot about how the tail end where the actual fraud's happening, but I want to touch a little bit more on the masterminds behind all of these crimes, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the types of individuals victims would be dealing with and encountering?
These individuals are evil. There's a work from home scam called Money Mules, where they'll befriend almost the victim, and they'll send them money, and then that person's instructed to send the money somewhere else. A lot of these folks tend to be elderly at time. They will call this person constantly. They will almost groom them and look up stuff, and say, oh, hey, I know that you bought this house, public information. And then they develop that relationship with folks and these people. And if they're elderly or they live alone, they develop that relationship. And so it makes it easy. They think they're doing the right thing.
That's terrifying.
It's absolutely horrible.
So can you tell us a little bit about what specifically you guys do as part of National Consumer Protection Week? Maybe tell us some of the other agencies you work with, how you promote an outreach to consumers.
Yes, the National Consumer Protection Week, like I said before, the event launched back in 1998, and it's still strongly going to this day. And social media has been a big force with that and spreading the word on how people and consumers can avoid frauds and scams. How people can get involved. Really, it's community outreach. So there's multiple ways. People on social media can write blog posts. They can plan an event at their local communities, at their churches, post offices, some of the retirement communities, anything just to push the word out on how to protect themselves. We encourage people to do that on social media and, again, out in their communities. There is a lot of partners that do National Consumer Protection Week. It's not only us, but the Better Business Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission is who started it.
FBI is involved.
So it's really a big collaborative effort across the country and across different branches of, the federal government, state governments, private organizations, all kind of working together.
That's exactly right.
So you mentioned that National Consumer Protection Week started in 1998, but I know the Postal Inspection Service and the Postal Service have been around for much longer than that. Can you talk a little bit about what you have done for prevention historically?
Yes, postal inspectors have been protecting consumers ever since the mail fraud statute had been passed back in 1872. One of our core missions here at the U.S. Postal Inspection Service is prevention and consumer education. There are a lot of scammers, and there aren't that many U.S. postal inspectors across the country, roughly 1,300. So naturally, we can't arrest everybody. So one of our main things is that prevention piece, and we want to educate our consumers. We do this through actively working with other agencies and doing campaigns such as National Consumer Protection Week. Some of our prevention methods that we do is we do partner with a lot of the different federal and government agencies. For instance, we partnered this last week, or it's going to cover a month. We partnered with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, and we're doing a dating or defrauding scam. So, concentrating on the romance scams. So we work with our federal partners and push out that prevention method. We also have public service announcements that you can find on our website that go over different cases and scams that we feel that consumers need to be aware of. So that's another place that you can go and look. We also have a few publications out there on how to prevent becoming a mail fraud victim. So we do have that outreach as well.
Jessica, I've heard you guys bring up this idea of a romance scam, and I feel like I might already know what it means just from the name, but could you explain to us a little bit more about that specifically?
Yeah, romance scams is where usually, again, online, an individual will introduce themselves to another individual and they build a relationship. Eventually, it leads to, oh, hey, I'm overseas and my car broke down. I need to get that $1,000.
Oh, my gosh.
And then that's your girlfriend or boyfriend, or, and then
emotionally, at least.
Emotionally, right. And then they trick the victims into sending them money.
This is catfishing to the extreme. Wow.
Extreme catfishing, yes.
Ashley, so as I understand it, how the inspection service is going to be kicking off this week is going to be very much at the behest of each individual area, the local areas.
Yes.
But could you tell us a little bit about some of the bigger events that have happened in previous years?
Certainly. In previous years, the local divisions for the inspection service, they have actually rented out billboards advertising National Consumer Protection Week and the particular focus for that week. In the past, we've also had Shred It days where the inspection service has hosted a Shred It site for consumers to bring their sensitive documents, and we shred it for them for free.
Are there any common red flags that might be associated with these work from home schemes that people should be aware of?
There is some verbiage out there that victims should be aware of, and maybe, that light bulb goes off in their head. So if an advertisement says, be your own boss, guaranteed job, if they offer you a job and you've never even interviewed with someone, these are some of those red flags that people should have in the back of their mind. Or even a high-paying position and there's no requirement for that. There's no on-the-job training. There's no certificate. There's nothing you have to do, but it pays high. Some red flags that people should be aware of. And again, just if it sounds too good to be true, follow your gut because it's probably too good to be true.
Ashley, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today and teaching us more about how the Postal Inspection Service is approaching National Consumer Protection Week for the betterment of the American people. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think we're ready for Did You Know? In this segment, Yasmin and I each share an interesting historical or cultural fact about the Postal Service.
It's a way for us to tell you things about the Postal Service that most people probably don't know. This time, we're sticking with the theme of the Postal Service's role in fighting fraud. Dale, did you know that the original Ponzi scheme took place over the U.S. mail system?
Seriously?
Yeah. Today, most people know about Ponzi schemes thanks to Bernie Madoff.
The guy who conned investors out of something like $50 billion?
$65 billion, to be exact. Well, this kind of scam goes all the way back to 1920, when a hustler named Charles Ponzi set up a scheme that promised to give investors 50% returns on the money they gave him in a short amount of time.
Ah, Charles Ponzi. Well, that would explain the name, but it doesn't explain how he was able to promise investors that level of return.
So here's how it worked. In 1906, the Universal Postal Union created international reply coupons as a way for people in different countries to send return postage to each other. Basically, you could buy coupons in your own country and mail them to someone overseas. That person could redeem the coupons in their own country for the equivalent value in local postage. International regulations set the rate of exchange, but after World War I, there was massive devaluation of European currencies.
Okay, I'm following along so far.
So Ponzi realized that because the European currencies lost so much of their value after the war, if you purchased international reply coupons in many European nations, those coupons were worth more in the United States than you'd paid for them. So if he could buy enough European coupons to sell in the US, he could make a killing. Ponzi convinced a few investors to chip in, promising them a 50% profit in 45 days. But he didn't realize the coupons couldn't be redeemed for cash, only for postage. That didn't stop him, though. He simply used cash from a new group of investors to pay back the original investors.
Ah, the old pyramid scheme. It only works if you can keep getting new investors, though, to come on in and pay for the earlier ones.
Right. So eventually the postal inspectors got suspicious. They knew that Ponzi couldn't be making enough money from buying and reselling the coupons. But they couldn't do anything because investors were seemingly still raking in money thanks to the newbies kicking more in.
But then,
Ponzi made a fatal mistake. He got overconfident. He invited authorities to audit his books and said he'd stop taking new investments during the audit. Well, that spooked his investors, who started withdrawing their money.
uh-oh.
You got it. A month later, a Massachusetts bank commissioner ordered Ponzi's bank to stop honoring his checks. 3 investors filed a petition to declare Ponzi bankrupt. At that point, since he couldn't pay back his investors, the postal inspectors were able to move in. Ponzi was charged with using the mail to commit fraud, among other crimes. He spent about 11 years in prison and was then deported to Italy.
So justice was done. While we're on the subject of fighting fraud, we know from our earlier podcast about the Postal Inspection Service that they trace their roots all the way back to Benjamin Franklin.
I remember that. All the way back to 1775.
That's right. They didn't call them inspectors back then, though. In fact, the first person to fill the role of overseeing the integrity of the postal system was William Goddard, whose official title was Surveyor of the Post. His job was to tour the country, establishing new post offices, arranging mail transportation contracts, and settling postmasters' accounts.
So when did the inspection service begin to resemble the organization we know today?
Well, it was gradual. In 1801, a special agent was appointed to investigate delays in moving mail between Washington, D.C. and Kentucky. 6 years later, another was hired to secretly investigate mail robberies in Tennessee. By 1861, the Post Office Department, as it was then known, had 21 agents. Their workload kept expanding as Congress enacted more laws to protect mail and mailers.
Such as?
Well, in 1872, for example, Congress banned the mailing of obscene materials, and in 1873, the Comstock Act added information about contraception or abortion to the banned list. Also in 1872, Congress passed the first mail fraud statute to let special agents pursue swindlers who use the mail system. In 1880, these special agents were renamed Post Office Inspectors. The title changed to Postal Inspector in the 1950s.
So the inspection service has had to change with the times.
That's right. One of the inspector's biggest cases was capturing the Déaut-Trémont brothers, notorious train robbers, in 1927 after 4 years of pursuit. And yes, they were instrumental in bringing down our friend Charles Ponzi.
With that, it looks like we've come full circle. Well, that wraps up this installment of Did You Know? Dale, I really enjoyed our conversation with the postal inspectors today.
Me too, Yasmin. What was your main takeaway?
For me, it was fascinating to hear about the scams that these perpetrators put together. Some of them are honestly really clever, and I can see how people could easily become victims without knowing it. I hope the red flags that Jessica mentioned are helpful to any of our listeners that may have been approached for these scams.
Agreed. I think that what really shocks me the most is even during a global pandemic, these individuals are out there trying to figure out ways to game the system, hurt others, take advantage of them, and it's just really nice to know that we've got the inspection service helping to look out for the American people.
Agreed, and they have a great website and lots of resources available for anyone who thinks that they may have encountered any of these scams. Their website is www.uspis.gov.
All right, that wraps us up. Don't forget to subscribe to Mailin' It wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss the next episode. And follow along on Instagram at US Postal Service, Twitter at USPS, and on Facebook for the latest postal news.